for joining. It's really exciting to be able to spend a little bit of time with the group sharing some of the stuff that's going on in the innovation area of Ashford University and Bridgepoint. And, when I say looking forward, what does the online classroom of tomorrow look like? I want to set the expectations that we're not talking about 10 years from now, and we're not talking about elsewhere. Really what I'm hoping to focus on today is what might our classroom look like tomorrow, and just explore some of the projects that we're working on and some of the early findings and things that are beginning to get folks excited at Ashford and Bridgepoint. So jumping right in, and I shared this a little bit while we were getting started, waiting for the hour. I like to go back to this image for a couple of reasons. One, John Dewey is one of my favorites, and I think that the quote here really frames sort of the conversation about innovation, which is, the way we do things currently, it's not bad, but I would argue that we haven't gotten it right yet. Even if the world wasn't changing and we still had the same problems that we had yesterday, I don't think we've quite nailed school. And then secondly, the world continues to change and adapt and evolve and create needs that we need to meet educationally, and maybe in ways that we haven't done before. So I'm really excited in the summer of last year, officially, though there had been innovation projects going on in the university and in the company previously, there was really an effort to formalize this work. And I wanted to just share just a little bit about that to provide some context for the projects that I'm going to share with you today. First and foremost, just acknowledging that all of the projects that we work on in innovation are a collaboration between Ashford University and Bridgepoint Education, and they're overseen by this steering committee. And the steering committee consists of folks from Ashford, Craig Swenson, Laura Pomerneum, Jim Smith, Sherry Jones, sort of the senior leadership of Ashford University, and some folks from Bridgepoint Education, Tom McCarty, our Chief Marketing Officer, Andy Sheen, the Chief Academic Learning Officer, and a host of support staff that help to sort of operationalize these various projects. So as I talk about the things that are going on, I want to just, again, set the scene that this is a true collaboration driven by the initiatives, strategic initiatives of Ashford University. So none of the projects that we're going to discuss today originated anywhere really but Ashford. And so it's exciting that we're formalizing these things. There's a whole host of projects. I'm not going to get into the details of all of them, but I just wanted to provide you a quick snapshot of some of the things that we're working on. Cohort of One, engaged social learning, that's improving our discussion forums, chatbots, a redesign of English 122. So there's a total of 8 projects here that fall under this innovation suite. And I'm going to show you just one or two today to give you a sense of where we are headed. But one more piece of contextual information before we get into the details, which is that design and innovation is it's a tricky thing. And so we wanted to have a framework for analyzing and measuring the progress that we were able to achieve. And so we adopted something called design-based research. And I'm just curious in the chat, let me know out of curiosity if you have heard of design-based research before. It's developed by Anne Brown and Alan Collins in the early 1990s. And basically it looks like this. So you start off with what you know about learning theory and the requirements for a project, and you make an initial design of that project. Now you implement and you analyze that design, and you're going to learn some things, but chances are you're not going to have gotten it completely right. And so part of design-based research is this iterative nature. So we try something, we do a really deep dive. How did it work out? And then we figure out, is this worth continuing? Should we change an aspect of it? Is this project just a bad idea? And we entertain all these options. So running through, give you an example here. So project requirements might be an undergraduate course involving involving adaptive learning and improving student learning. That might be our requirements. And at the end of that project, we're going to have some sort of a course, a deliverable. And of course, that's sort of measured by timelines and project plans and reported out to the steering committee. But outside of just that end product, it's almost like the space, like NASA, the space organization. Sure, you get a trip to the moon maybe, but you also get Velcro. And so some of the things that we've gotten, I'm going to share with you today. Some involving social media, some involving video feedback, some involving immersive simulations. And then I really wanted to just drive home the point that this innovation work that we're doing really doesn't exist in a vacuum. And importantly, we are intentionally feeding the learnings from these particular projects into various trainings for instructional design staff, and also into this course design enhancements guide, which is used by the Learning Services Department in partnership with Ashford to try to focus on certain elements of good learning. And so this design-based research process really manifests in a couple of different ways. And since the topic of the conversation today really is, what's the classroom going to look like? As I was thinking about it, I proposed to you all that there's maybe two parts to the classroom in terms of what we're going to innovate. One are the tools that we use, and then the second part are the strategies, the instructional strategies and the interactions. And so I wanted to just share a little bit about some of the work that's going on in way of the tools. And as I sat down to do this the other day, hopefully some of you that have been around a while might get a kick out of this graphic, but I wanted to really try to portray how the online classroom has evolved over the years. And I don't know if anyone is old enough to have been around to remember this version of the Ashford University classroom Blackboard back in the day, back prior to 2010. But of course, Waypoint. Waypoint was a tool that we picked up, used to be a vendor of ours. We purchased, we did a phase 2 of Waypoint upgrade, made it an entirely more robust system. Of course, we switched over to eCollege at some point. I think that was 2010 again, and the interface was a little bit better, but not much. Of course, along the last decade or so, we've added great tools like Constellation, our ebook platform. The Waypoint system itself, most everyone I'm sure has had an opportunity to use it. It's incredible. The amount of data that we get and the changes that we can make as a result are awesome. And then hopefully you remember eCollege 2.0. So we had a nice sort of rebranding of the eCollege environment. I think it was sometime in 2014, and then mobile app, right? Help Now, 2012, interact small videos helping students to navigate difficult parts of the classroom, and then finally, and can I get a hallelujah and an amen, Canvas. And I in previous roles oftentimes had to explain to very passionate and interested in innovating faculty members who basically I had to tell no, because eCollege, the answer was often no. It's an exciting time with Canvas. There is innate functionality that we are just starting to take advantage of that's really exciting. And integration of Portfolium you probably saw recently, and then Civitas, which is an incredible initiative to use data and student performance to try to provide real-time interventions. This is a part of our Canvas phase 2, and I wanted to just spend a minute or two talking about Canvas phase 2. You may or may not be aware, but the transition from eCollege to Canvas really was a 2-phase design approach. Phase 1 was lift and shift, get all the content out of one container and into another. And then phase 2 really is and started with this idea of let's see how it's going. Let's do surveys. Let's put feedback links in. Let's really feel and hear what's happening in the classroom, how things are working out, and let's make some intentional changes. There's a whole roadmap, including lots of communication that's gone out. I wanted to include this picture of my boss, Andy Sheen, just because I thought it was funny. But there are some great projects that are underway right now. Web conferencing, so the ability to have synchronous video conversations with your students in the context of a class, amazing. There's, again, Civitas in the phase 1 of its installation, and there are a number of really great initiatives coming out of the Canvas Phase 2. Phase 2 is one of our innovation profile initiatives, and again is managed by that Innovation Steering Committee. So be on the lookout for web conferencing, be on the lookout for an enhancement to the gradebook coming soon, be on the lookout for Civitas as a tool to help manage and teach students more effectively. Those are some of the tools. To provide a little example of some of the design changes that we've been playing with and experimenting with, I wanted to share a case study with you of a particular course, Business 401, which just concluded the second phase of an adaptive pilot. And adaptive is an exciting sort of much anticipated technology in education. Goes back really to sort of the 70s and 80s and the very beginning of computer aided learning and cognitive tutoring. And so in the fall of 2016, and I'll give you a brief background, then we'll get to the kind of the fun stuff. We undertook the experiment before the formalization of any of the innovation agenda or framework to test out Realize It, which was an adaptive learning platform. Essentially, the students interact with the platform, and the platform tests their knowledge, provides them links to content where they might be lacking knowledge, helps to figure out what information can be skipped so that the student does not have to continue to work on materials and concept they've already learned. In phase 1, we had integrated this Realize It into a treatment sort of design of the course, and really, not remarkably, just replaced the quizzing. So in the traditional course 401, there was quizzes. We changed out to include the Realize It adaptive quizzing tool, and you'll see the red lines there. They actually represent a gating. So the students weren't allowed to do any of the discussions or the assignments until they completed the adaptive tool. And I just propose this as a background because I want you to see how far we've come in such a short period of time, and the importance of design-based research and the fact that we're iterating over and over again. So not entirely surprising, the results of this first pilot were very negative. In fact, every metric that really could be measured went down. And so, including end of course surveys, students hated this. And part of the reason they hated it, I'm going to show you some qualitative feedback from the end of course surveys, is because it was a lot more work. Part of it was because they couldn't get to the rest of the class until they finished this work. And ultimately, the feedback was mixed, with quite a bit of negative about the adaptive. So, if you're just doing regular educational research, not design-based research, you might say, well, that was a failure. Turns out adaptive learning doesn't work at all. I guess we should move on to the next thing to investigate. Well, fortunately, we're not doing that. What we're doing is going to our second phase. So again, if you imagine that spiral of design-based research, and Terry Heron, who I was conversing with prior to the start of the presentation, along with Kevin Kuznia, really are the backbone and the crux of this design. So props to them. I just get the pleasure of sharing it. But in the new course, and this is one of the things that I would expect to see throughout all of our coursework in the next couple of years, not all, but a lot of our coursework, and this is simply project-based learning. So what we know is that when students are working on things that are real world, things that they have a vested interest in, things that have a situatedness to them, it's inside of a scenario, it triggers parts of the brain and learning and thinking that end up making more applicable and useful knowledge. So instead of an index of knowledge, an encyclopedia student walking out and being able to define a bunch of terms, but not really maybe do a whole lot, students are working on building skills. They're actually practicing the skills and things that they would need to do potentially in the real world. Where it really gets interesting, I think, is that it's not just this project based. There's a bunch of other sort of support activities. You can see the final project is almost 30% of the course, but there are 20% assignments. There's some UCU, there's some adaptive activities and interactives. I'll give you a quick overview of those. So one thing that I would expect to see a lot of sort of coming out of, again, some of these innovation projects are the use of interactive scenarios. So again, we know that information in context is more powerful in terms of measuring somebody's ability to do useful things. So in this particular course, the first thing the students do when they come in is they participate in an interactive little learning module. And in the module, it really sets up to the student, hey, here's the situation. You're in a boardroom, you're a new employee, you have a project that you're gonna start next week, and here's the general business conditions that set you up for the things that we're going to ask you to do. And this little tweak, right, doesn't change much, but it provides a context which emulates an actual working environment. And we know that that not only is beneficial for students in terms of their transitioning to real world skills, but they actually feedback has been that they tend to like this a lot. So this is exciting. The other thing, adaptive coaching, so adaptive learning. In this particular pilot, Biz 401, instead of just making the students go through the content, Terry and Kevin really set it up as an adaptive coach. So the idea being that the students are going to learn the skills that they need to do the project inside of this adaptive coaching. And then finally, these UCU video exchanges. So one of the things I think we have objectively been really sort of impressed and excited by is the simple addition of video exchange as a part of the learning environment. So in this particular case, the student brings their object to the instructor as an artifact and explains parts of the project. There's a meaningful interaction between the student and the faculty in a short 2-minute recorded video. So the student puts together their piece and they might then say, look, I really had trouble with this. I think this part looks good. I need your help, professor, with this particular concept. Submit it. Instructor has an opportunity to view the artifact that the student submitted, and then provide really rich and humane feedback in video form. And we're finding again that this has been really exciting for a lot of people. Again, the real brilliance of this design, again, is the idea that we're really blending project-based learning with adaptive learning. So let's say at the beginning of the first week, the deliverables and financial evaluation of a company, a publicly traded company. Well, the skill building practice for that exercise that the students would interact with in the adaptive platform might involve sub-concepts like identifying the appropriate financial metrics, or evaluating corporate health, or comparing and contrasting potential acquisition targets. These might be the subset skills that then get worked on in the adaptive platform. It's automated, the student goes through it on their own. And then by the time they're ready to produce the artifact, they've had an opportunity to practice those skills, get feedback, and really learn in a lower stakes environment. All that to say, okay, great, it sounds wonderful, Mike, how did it do? So in terms of design-based research, because we're not just changing one element of the class, we take an approach of comparing the baseline to the post-design after between 2 and 3 iterations of a course. In this case, I'm going to show you the star here indicating that this is the data from the second round of the project, and a little bit of demographic data in terms of when these things occurred. But what you have here is you have a baseline, you have a target. And then, as I mentioned, the first set of results for Realize It, every metric went in the wrong direction. So how did we do in our revised second iteration? And the answer is much better. So you can see that and this is 4 sections out of a total of 11. So one important lesson that we learned from the first time where we did 11 sections and they all caused harm was, hey, maybe we should check in mid-pilot and see if things are a disaster. And in this case, they fortunately were not a disaster. In fact, end of course survey was pretty markedly higher, the GPA was pretty markedly higher, and the fail rate was lower, which is great, meaning folks who are in there definitely are failing at a lower rate than the Realize It, and even more so the baseline. The course-to-course progression, 80.3 to 79.07, there's not much difference there. So even though it shows a slight decline, it's not much. And then the completion rate and the drop rate are the two things that, as we are looking at the next iteration, these are the metrics that we're going to try to move through some of our design features. So just to sort of give you another picture. So when we do these innovation projects, we do a real deep digital ethnography. So we run the classes, we analyze the end of course surveys, we go in and we look at the activity of the students, we interview the instructors. Here's just a couple of comments. The red was one that I would consider to be a negative comment, and the greens are positive comments. Let's just take the negative right off the top. Person felt like there was a lot of work and not a lot of time to do it in. That's a fair comment. I don't know that it's going to change a ton of what we do for the next iteration, but it's noted. But look at the positives. So it really gave me a better perspective on course material. Any student that takes this class would gain the required knowledge of the class. I love the new course setup without the weekly discussion posts. The UCU and interactives were much more helpful. This is one of the 4 sections. I'll go, here's another set of positives. I enjoyed the course. It was a great experience. Middle one there, this is my favorite class of the ones that I have taken. It made me work hard, but once you got the hang of it, it got a little easier. So again, overwhelmingly positive responses to this new this new format. Now, there was one student who provided some pretty negative feedback, which, by the way, is our best friend in innovation. You might think, Mike, dear God, don't show us that your innovation work wasn't perfect. And I say to you, there's no way to get it better unless we expose sort of all of the good and bad parts. And in this case, this student definitely did not have the webcam and definitely didn't seem as interested in trying new things. But again, this is a component of that feedback that we are then going to try to iterate into the next round. One final set of positive feedback, and then again, we interviewed the instructors. So we don't just look at the metrics and assume that the class teaches itself. So in our interviews with these instructors, we came up with some pluses and some minuses and things that we wanted to change for the next iteration. I can tell you that this video chat, and then we'll maybe sort of wind down and open it up for some questions about the specific course elements. I don't want to run over, but the feedback that we have gotten from the faculty is that through the ability to interact via video, there is an increased sense of connection with the students and the instructor, that there's an increased accountability. So, the idea of folks can more easily ignore written feedback, emails, things that are maybe less personal. If you are obligated each week to create a 2 to 3 minute video to check in with your instructor, the accountability goes up. What we're finding is that generally this, in our innovation projects in general, the students who persist do better. And some students are reticent or hesitant to try new things. And so this is one of the things that we're really digging into is how can we communicate better? How can we give value propositions that, that help students to understand the reason why we might want to approach learning differently than a final paper and some discussions. And so in summary, I know we got about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to sort of reiterate, these are the things that I am seeing emerge from our various design products. Video interactions between the faculty, mentoring, coaching, project-based learning, again, working on something of significance that has maybe even an outside audience. In the cohort of one, which is a different innovation project that we're working on, the students are developing a class. So they're actually building their own online class, and they meet with the instructor, again, asynchronous video each week to check in. How's the project going? Am I headed in the right direction? Did you take my feedback? What happened to when you said you were going to add this part? So there's really a relationship. And that relationship, it's really fun, and I know Terry would probably agree, to hear veteran instructors who have been teaching online for years get excited about a new way of teaching. And I've seen that in multiple contexts, so I'm excited about that. The other thing is adaptive learning. So, as we're really trying to figure out how does adaptive learning best fit into our online learning environment and in which ways can we integrate it most meaningfully, we're having conversations with many vendors. We're trying new tools. And again, the goal is to come up with sort of like that suite of tools that we had up earlier with Constellation and Waypoint and Portfolium and Civitas, to add one more in the tool belt of our faculty, and in helping students to learn some of the more basic information that's maybe a little bit more memory-based or perhaps a little more foundational, just like we showed in the adaptive pilot. And then finally, one that I didn't touch on in this particular case study example, but social media integration, the idea of bringing things in from outside the classroom. In one of our other pilots about discussion forums, we've got Twitter widgets that students are able to scan and find topics that are up to the second in terms of relevance of whatever it is the students are discussing, really breaking down the barriers between the learning management system and the outside world. And so all this to say, there's a number of really exciting things. There's no spaceship, there's no, this is not, innervated with artificial intelligence, except for a little bit of that adaptive tool. Again, this isn't 20 years in the future. This is courses developed in 2018 and courses developed in 2019. And so I will pause there and thank you again for your attentiveness. And I know that the chat's been going off. Questions, comments, Kate was going to help me to make sure that if there were any great questions in the chat that we would be able to capture those.
Yep, let me back up. William Woods had a question when you were talking about the pilot for Business 401.
Okay.
Wanting to know, was the difference the students and not the professors between the iterations?
So in this first iteration, in both iterations, Kevin Kuznia, the chair of the BS in Finance, hand-selected the faculty that he wanted to teach these courses. In this phase that we just completed, there were 4 faculty. 2 were full-time and 2 were associate, which was really nice because we got to get a perspective from not only folks in the building, but folks out on the ground. And really the whole design was different. So even though we're sort of comparing just for the sake of reference, we're not in any way saying that, that the pilot 1 and the pilot 2 are directly comparable. They're different designs. We've learned, we came up with a better one, we think, the second time. Hopefully that makes sense.
There was another question. What tool will we use for in-class video conferences? Big Blue Button, Zoom?
Oh, that's a great question. One that I will give a very political deferred answer to. I think Morgan Johnson is the person who knows the answer to that question best. I know that Zoom was on the table and we're running into some contract complications in legal. We're working diligently to try to get through those, but I know that Big Blue Button is another option which exists inside of Canvas. The short answer is I'm not sure which one it's going to be or when, but it is a high priority and I expect us to have something in the next couple of months, but Morgan Johnson would be the best person to ask.
Okay, when do you expect to implement these new learning methods for all classes, or do you have any specific target dates?
So these things are now available. And as I said, we're cross-pollinating by working with instructional designers, by populating these guides. But if anything that I've mentioned today is of interest to you and you're working on a course redesign in 2018, mention it specifically to the instructional designer and program manager, and we'll make sure that you have the support you need in order to implement these innovations. Oops, you're muted, Kate.
Thank you. What kind of projects did the students do in the course?
Oh, so for Business 401, really it was a pretty comprehensive financial evaluation of a company. So they got to choose a company, a publicly traded company from, off of the indexes, perform an analysis, and essentially create a pretty intensive report advising the company about whether to acquire or not acquire this entity. So really it's sort of taking the principles of finance and making them active. So you have to know how to value aspects of a company in order to make a recommendation on video to your instructor that actually makes sense. So that's really what they were working on, is just this analysis and recommendation.
Okay, so for the Business 401 adaptive learning, how large are the class sizes? Did class size have an impact on learning? Did you?
Yeah, we didn't look at class size per se. So we took 4 sections of the class that ran on, 130 and 26 of 2018. Those courses then were ran and then, of course, switched back to the normal design. And now we're on a pause before we continue on. We're not really looking at class size, but we're looking at those course metrics that are sort of the standard metrics from institutional effectiveness, drop rate, pass rate, GPA, et cetera, et cetera. It would be fascinating at some point to do some regression or statistical analysis of some of the cofactors, but we have not yet gotten to that depth. I'll tell you that every time we do a project, we learn something new that we can look at to learn how things are going. It's fascinating. Most recently got into the constellation data usage and really trying to tie that in with the content that's in the adaptive. Data. Gosh, I wish we could do this level of investigation with every redesign that we did. It would be phenomenal.
We'll just clone you, Mike, and we'll be good, you and your team. Any idea on the average class size for those?
Biz 401 was, I think, around 17 was the average in those. Yeah.
How do you, go ahead,
sorry, began with slightly more.
Okay. How do you think this would work with introduction courses where students are just learning the various concepts and skills pertaining to their major?
I think that's a great point. So, when one of the first innovation projects we did, which had this video sort of exchange in it, we had mixed results. And one of the questions we raised afterwards was, is this the wrong design or is it maybe the wrong audience? And so I think that there is an intentional scaffolding that needs to take place in order to build up the confidence and the experience of the learners. Again, we're seeing that when folks get into it, they find it to be beneficial generally and positive. It's that reticence to get into doing something new. And we all know, because teaching our courses is very habitual and repetitious, right? And so we see on both sides of the equation, from the instructors and the students, when you ask us to do something new, it takes some time to figure out how to approach it and to make it work. And so I guess my answer would be that I think the sooner we can introduce them to the video idea, the better, because then they don't get into 10 classes and say, and in the 11th class, oh, now I have to do video. I actually think it would be fascinating to start marketing some of these sort of methods of learning, this one-on-one, this project-based, this video-based, as a way of perhaps even attracting students that want that level of connection. So that's a whole nother another story, but it's really exciting. to have these conversations occurring, especially with the folks on the Innovation Steering Committee who can really help to fast forward some of this and get it implemented.
So a question from the video from a perspective of a faculty member, agreeing that video feedback to students works great, but it takes significantly more time for instructors. Any ideas on this? And this might be a training issue more than an innovation issue, Mike, but I'll let you
No,
take a swing
I love
at
the
it.
question, because with every good idea there comes complications, and with video there's certainly a couple of them, and we've been batting these around, the idea of, well, what if people don't want to be on video, right? Like that's a legitimate concern. The time, so fascinatingly, one of the things that we're really trying to keep an eye on with these projects is the amount of instructor time. So in the first round, the 4 classes that I just showed you the data for, we were actually able to track to time in the classroom, what was the duration of the video responses that each faculty recorded. Is there a correlation to that and sort of student satisfaction? Ultimately, I think it's a matter of looking at things differently. And here's why. I don't disagree, but I guess, if for me, it takes me longer to write and to translate thoughts into formal written language and feedback than it is for me to click on my webcam and say, hey, I read your paper. It's really great. I think you picked a good company. Here's the problem with your, XYZ calculation. I made some notes in your paper, but this is the crux of your issue. Boom. The students then just that if you can get into the mode of it, and if we design, I guess, the interactions carefully, paying attention to the time on task, it shouldn't be something that is detrimental. It should only be a positive. But that is a really good point, and something that we are working with the faculty to make sure that if we create courses that take too long to teach, they're not scalable. So absolutely.
Were there scheduling problems in getting students available for conference? One advantage of online is the asynchronous learning for some working students.
Yeah, so for Business 401, there was no synchronous. It was all asynchronous. So the student would record a 2-minute video, instructor records it back. For a different project that we're working on, the cohort of 1, which is the Master's of Arts in Teaching and Learning and Technology with Michelle Warren, there's actually an instructor welcome call the first week of the class for all 4 of the courses in the sequence. Michelle was very concerned that students were not going to want to do this, that they wouldn't be able to do this, and what she found was it was amazing to talk to her the week that she had all these welcome calls, because she said, oh my God, I was able to explain in 30 minutes more than I was sometimes able to explain over the course of all 4 courses. I was able to see change. I was able to make a connection, to learn about who these people are in a way that you just don't get from a poster introduction. And so it's scary and it's different. We found it to be both worth the effort and also pleasantly not complicated. But again, small sample sizes, and we'll scale it. And I'm sure there will be issues and folks that can't or don't want to for some reason or another. And we'll build in alternate assignments and things. There's a fine line, I think, between forcing and really heavily encouraging, and we want to be flexible. So.
I don't think any of the courses in the pilots have been under your subject matter expertise, Mike, but an instructor wanted to know if you've taught one of these innovative style courses.
Oh, God, I wish I could. So the cohort of 1 that we're working on it is in my area of expertise. But as a designer working with, again, Terry Heron, I try to not have subject matter expertise and defer to Michelle Warren in as much as possible. She's the program chair. But I honestly can't wait to teach one of these. I think that the excitement that I would get logging in and seeing video messages from my students would far surpass, having to interact in discussion forums, for instance, in sort of the traditional methods that we use. So not yet, but I really want to.
Will the video tool be able to be used as a screen capturing tool where you can speak to what's on your screen, i.e. the student paper, point out various points of improvement, etc.?
Yeah, so we're becoming more sophisticated. We initially started using UCU, which is we have an institutional license for through the end of this year. Come to find out, we're maybe having some contract haggling sort of conversations with them, and so Terry and I, mostly Terry, are looking at alternate tools. Canvas has a tremendous suite of tools that are already included. We just need to be able to configure them the way that we need them in order to do the thing that we need. But to that very point, showing it's not just explaining with your face that is the heart of learning, right? In some cases, students need to see calculations. So in the event where where that's appropriate, we would like to build that sort of thing in, but it's something we're evolving.